talking about unraveling the anonymity paradox. Online, we want to be known and we don't want to be known. And online, we have an obligation as developers of tools and services that provide personal information services to collect the necessary information to provide the service. And so we're caught between providing identifiable information so that we can provide identifiable services and providing and collecting as little information as possible. So as an act of anonymization, I'm going to do something right now.
Not so easy.
It's not so easy, but my first act of de-identifying myself. My second act,
Wow.
I am no longer being photographed. My voice is being recorded. These are levels of a de-identification, which is part of the anonymization process. The third use case we're going to discuss is how do we anonymize data and at the same time provide services to identifiable people. And this requires making judgment calls about what data you collect, how you use it, and how you de-identify it. And that takes some effort, and that takes some technique, and that takes some imagination. So to help this discussion, since I cannot keep two thoughts in my head and speak at the same time, I've created a few slides. Oops. And I'm also directionally challenged. So let's talk about making it less personal. Very simple equation to bear in mind. PI, personal information. P is personal, I is information. PI minus P is I. Right? Very simple formula to use. The less P you have in PI, the less it is P, personal. However, it is not so easy just to remove all the PI and all the P and feel that you just have I. I'm sorry that I'm just using letters. Paul Ohm, who is a researcher, came up with an equation. You need 6 pieces of data to identify an individual. 6 pieces of data, and you can identify any individual. So even if they're not personally identifiable pieces of data, you can identify someone from 6 pieces of data. This presents challenges. AOL, Netflix found out this the hard way. They released a bunch of search queries to the public for big data analysis. Within 2 days in each case, people were able to identify who did which search queries in several cases based on what I'll call triangulation of search information. There was a medical, and they resulted in large fines. There was medical data released to do some big data medical analytics. Someone happened to know that the governor of the state of Massachusetts had an operation in 1993, lived in this zip code, and was able to re-identify the individual. So de-identification is not a simple process. So there are some terms you have to get used to. Earlier in the talk, we talked about anonymized data. What we really meant was, in many cases, de-identified data. Because to get to anonymized, you have to be able to have all the personal elements removed, and you have to exclude the possibility of re-identification based on other forms of information. So some terms to think about in terms of de-identifying data and leveling. Aggregated data. Aggregated data is taking data and grouping it together into masses of data that don't relate to an individual. You have to be careful when you think about aggregated data, because aggregated data about Jonathan Fox is still about Jonathan. But aggregated data about a group of people can be fairly anonymous depending on context. So one thing you might want to think about in building your games is aggregation of data. Another, you might want to think about anonymizing the data. Very high bar, so be careful if you say, in my game, all my data is anonymized because it'll promptly be challenged. Is it anonymized or de-identified? And this becomes very important vocabulary because the commitment to anonymization is a high bar that can easily be trumped. No pun intended. De-identified data, that's when you remove various elements of personal from it. You can still maintain uniqueness, but you remove personal elements. One technique for doing that is encrypting data. Still has a unique value, still going to be related to the individual, but you don't really know what the content of the data is anymore. Or you can pseudonymize data. And I love this one because I love the word pseudonymize. It's just fun to say. But that's taking it and adding some different values to the data. So putting an X in front of my name is pseudonymizing my name. It's not very strong pseudonymization, but it is pseudonymization. Turning all my letters of my name to different values of 4 letters or four numbers or more is really great pseudonymization. So there's still some uniqueness, still some identity, but really don't know without some translation that it's me. So one-way encryption is one way of de-identifying. You encrypt a piece of information, you throw away the keys. It has unique value, but you cannot unlock what the data is. When I was at McAfee and we received examples of spam, we would one-way encrypt it because we didn't need the details, we just needed the size so that we could do some matching and big pattern detection. Adding noise, that's a form of pseudonymization or data pollution. You have a big bucket of data, you add some false data in so you remove the potential for one-to-one relationships. Truncation, that is removing data. Does everyone remember when Google Analytics ran into trouble here in Germany? Google Analytics was sending back IP addresses of third parties. I believe the DPA in Bavaria took issue with this, and now when Google Analytics sends data back to Google for analytics, it truncates the IP address. So it's de-identified. It takes the last 2 octets out. That is truncation, which is a great form of de-identification as long as you truncate enough. For me, truncating A-T-H-A-N for my name is not great truncation because it's still John Fox and there's still a limited set of us. However, it's one way. Not collecting. This is actually the best way of de-identifying and anonymizing is not to collect to start with. You have to remember to collect really what you need, not what you can get. De-identifying data is removing data that you don't need or lessening it, and then masking. Masking is literally blocking, putting a mask over data elements. When you subscribe to something and you put in your credit card number and it shows it in little asterisks, that is a form of masking. There are other forms of masking where they literally put a black strip in front of the values. Sometimes that's a good form of masking, sometimes it's not. Because sometimes, just as when you put a black swatch over a piece of paper, then you can hold it up to the light and you can see through it. The same is actually online. There are some masking technologies that are better than others. So you have to be careful when you mask. We just kind of covered this. It's all in the technique. One-way encryption, you have to remember to throw away the keys. You have to have a strong enough level of encryption that it's not easily broken, getting increasingly harder. You can't always depend upon this because de-encryption techniques get better and better. However, it's one way of doing it today. It's adding noise. So you have a big puddle of data, you add enough misinformation so that there's not one-to-one relationships. So, salting is one term. There's another one I'll refer to later. Truncating, removing what data you don't need. Truncating. So if you, or adding to range. So if you need age, do you need my birth date, or do you need my birth range, which is between 25 and, well, we'll leave it at that. Not collecting, and then masking again, just blocking it out. Here are some resources that you can look at for further definition. This is a very rich and evolving space. I know you're not going to have a chance to read through all this today, but do take a look at it as you evolve your privacy education and games. Thank you.